Let me tell you about Camille. Camille is a woman in her early 20s, and Camille came to me with panic disorder and OCD and health anxiety, and Camille was desperate for help. I'm going to share with you today a mental brain hack that helped Camille with these conditions. Hi, I'm Paige Pradko. Welcome to Therapy for a Better Life. Before we get into what Camille did to help herself, we first have to understand what happens with fear in the brain. Joseph Ledoux is a neuroscientist, and he describes how a fear travels on two different pathways in the brain. First, we have a trigger, and the trigger can be a sensation, either something we pick up in our environment that we hear or see, feel, or it can be internally in our body. A trigger can also be a thought or a memory. But our brain picks up a trigger and it sends it directly to the thalamus. The thalamus is like a switchboard in our brain. And from the thalamus, it goes on two different pathways. The first pathway is super fast. It goes right to the amygdala and we have a whoosh of adrenaline. We've all felt that whoosh. Most of the time, our brain gets it wrong, right? Whatever our brain thought was going to be something dangerous really turned out to not be dangerous. But we still get that adrenaline rush. It's called the first fear. It's unconscious. We can't control it, and it's there for survival. But the thalamus also sends the message on a second pathway. That pathway is slower. It goes through the cortex, the thinking area of our brain. And the cortex, we decide whether or not that trigger was dangerous or not. That's completely under our control. So if we decide that the trigger was dangerous, the cortex sends a message to the amygdala, oh yes, that was dangerous. Keep giving this person a lot of adrenaline and cortisol and activate that sympathetic nervous system. And if we decide when it hits the cortex that it wasn't dangerous, whatever the trigger was, the cortex sends a message to the amygdala. Guess what? You overreacted. You can calm down. That noise you heard, that was just a pot falling on the floor. No problem. Calm down. Now, what happens if we have, for example, let me give you Camille's example. She would have panic. She would feel her heart race or she would feel dizzy. And right away when she picked up those sensations, again, it sent the message to the thalamus, sent the message right to the amygdala. She would get an adrenaline reaction, right? She would get that fight or flight whoosh, that big whoosh. And then when it would go to her cortex, she would add fearful thoughts. Oh no, what if I'm having a heart attack? Oh no, what if I'm dizzy and I'm going to faint? So she would stay in this panic cycle. Now, the same thing can happen with OCD. We can have a thought, an OCD thought, and we're going to get that initial whoosh from the amygdala, but that second pathway to the cortex, this is what is really critical. What messages is under our control? What messages are we going to send to the amygdala from the cortex? Are we going to send all the what if? Oh my gosh, what if I, just touched something contaminated and now I'm going to get myself sick, or I'm going to get my family sick, or what if I did something terribly wrong? If we send those kind of messages from our cortex to our amygdala, we are going to be in a panic mode. What we can do about it is a few things. As I said, that first fear we can't control. We're always going to get that. The second fear, that message of what we send to that amygdala, what we say to ourselves is very important, and what we do is important in our behavior. This is where exposure and ERP becomes very critical. So Now I'm going to share with you what Camille learned and what really helped her. This is a technique that I call my I.A.M technique, I.A.M. And this technique is a combination of an incidental exposure technique and mindfulness. Now, the I stands for identify, the A stands for allow, and the M stands for connect to the moment and then move on. I'm going to take you through how that technique works and where you do what in that anxiety cycle. So we initially get the triggers. We can't stop the triggers. We can't stop the thoughts. We can't stop the sensations or the memories. The triggers are always going to be there. That first rush of fear from the amygdala, that's always going to be there. That's a survival mechanism. Where the first thing that we can do is when we notice that initial rush of adrenaline, when we notice that initial anxiety, we do the I, identify. We are not going to get into all of the what if scenarios and misinterpretation as dangerous. We are simply going to identify it and attribute the anxiety to normal anxiety or OCD. I want you to just identify. I is identify it. And then instead of all of the what ifs or the behaviors of compulsing or the behaviors of avoiding or looking for reassurance or safety behaviors, we're just going to allow. That's the A. We're going to allow anxiety to be there. We're just going to allow. And then finally, this is a slower process. We're going to mindfully connect to the moment that we're living. What am I doing in this moment? Can I gradually shift my attention to what I'm doing in the moment? What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? Just gradually shifting to the moment. And then the final M of the I.A.M technique is moving on. So Camille practiced the I.A.M technique, the identify, allow, mindfully connect to the moment, and moving on. And at first, she struggled with it. It sounds very easy, but it takes time to practice this. Then it really clicked in. I would say within a couple of days, it really clicked in, and she began to do this every time she had a trigger, every time she had a sensation. And this really helped her tremendously. Again, this is a technique that combines mindfulness with exposure and incidental exposure. Now, if you'd like more information on ERP and exposures, watch this playlist right here. This is really going to help you.